sometimes the most powerful education isn't the stuff in an online course or in a lecture course, but it's when people see something that happened and said, wow, I get the lesson. The lesson's clear here.
Hey, welcome to 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. We're a father-son leadership podcast where we talk with other lifelong learners about making an impact and solving big problems. And dates, and it was weird. You know, our guest. We'll circle around to Jeff here in a second after I do my normal monologue of BS and unrelevant information. It's funny how sometimes the dates just come out. It's like, 2 weeks. Oh, that's the 14th of March. And there's two things, two factors for you here to think about, folks. One, I was just looking at the calendar, scheduling a hunt camp lunch that date. And two, if you didn't know it, folks, unless it's a leap year, the days are the same in February and March. You get to practice them twice. So, you know what? If you're one of those people out there that miss Valentine's Day,
there you go.
Maybe you could do it again on March 14th. You know, because it's still a Friday.
Which, if we got our dates right, is when this show is coming out. So there you go, folks. Get planning.
There you go. There you go. So there's a little reminder: second chance Valentine's Day for you in March. Jeff,
I'm glad you got around to the dating advice that I thought you were starting off with, and you said, well, dates. So there we go, guys.
Yeah. Jeff, I hope you didn't skip out on Valentine's Day.
I remembered, Otis. I remember.
All right, good. So did I. We had Miss Suzanne and I had a very nice romantic fondue, whatever you call it, fondue thing.
Yeah.
Dinner?
Yeah, in our little rinky-dink trailer at the ranch. So
I'm sure it was shaking in the wind and everything. Oh yeah.
sometimes the simplest venue is the best.
Oh yeah. Well, you know, she's one of them women that's pretty easy to please. Like I take her to a hockey game for her birthday. You know, so that's romantic for her. But yeah, so Jeff, you remembered that, and you know, as I was, and this is off the wall, but I get to ask off the wall questions because I'm the host. You know, there's all these medical shows out there, and you having worked in the hospital, running a hospital medical stuff. How accurate are they? I mean, you know, we're watching Miss Suzanne and I love this new show on Max called The Pit. How accurate is that stuff?
Well, I haven't seen Pit, but hospitals are really complicated places. People are vulnerable. There's a lot at stake. Medical technology is advancing all the time. It's tough being a clinical provider, a physician, especially a nurse. Lots of pressures, lots of consolidation in the industry, which adds a whole layer on the business side. But they're challenging places, they're complicated places, they're places where people are really vulnerable and in need of care. And I don't know how the show that you were describing pictures the healthcare industry, but I was on the in the nonprofit side of healthcare my whole career, where we had a mission imperative to make our communities healthier and stronger, and so we had to hit every other metric that publicly traded healthcare systems had to meet, clinical standards, quality standards, financial standards, and we had to serve, and we took great pride in serving everyone, regardless of their ability to pay. So that's a little bit. The healthcare is a very big industry with lots of different players, but on the nonprofit side, that was my experience. I was very proud to serve. And strengthen our communities. In some cases, they were communities that every other healthcare facility had left because it was such a needy population. I'm proud to be part of an organization, to have been a part of an organization that didn't leave those folks behind.
Well, I think you hit a couple of things that really triggered in my mind the leadership of an organization like that, because it's so, when you think about hospital, medical facility, clinic, I mean, from the hourly wage janitor to, the super high paid, arrogant neurosurgeon.
Yeah.
Who, by the way, you want that guy to be a confident SOB.
Sure.
It's just like pilots. Yeah.
Exactly. But dealing with that must have been a heck of an experience in that. I mean, because, truthfully, compared to what, my leadership foundation in the Army is like, well, that's pretty simple. He drives a truck, he shoots a gun, very simple stuff.
Yeah.
So what you were dealing with there, I'd love to just dive into that.
Sure. Yeah. One of the things that when I was reflecting on this, on the show and my understanding, the approach of the show, about my own journey, probably the most significant role that I had for the longest period of time was with a nonprofit health system. And in that health system, the values really meant something. They weren't just they just weren't just on the wall, but they shaped the way we led and the way we did strategic planning and just the way we operated. I was brought into that company after a very bad circumstance, $120 million financial fraud. I was the turnaround ethics guy to help build, a culture of integrity. And that was an extraordinary journey. When I was brought in from the outside, we had this fraud that was devastating, and it predated me. I didn't really know what caused it. I just knew the mess, and there were a lot of things we needed to do. Our employee engagement was in the bottom decile, the bottom 10% of all companies in the world. Our financial performance declined so that we almost, defaulted on our bond covenants. Our financial performance was poor, and our reputation had really taken a big blow. And the work of kind of rebuilding a culture of integrity in that organization was an enormous privilege. It was really hard. It was really tough, but it was a tremendous privilege to appeal to people's better angels and to help them, connect with their highest aspirations. As people want to work for an ethical organization, an organization that believes in its values, and just kind of activating that and bringing that forward was challenging work and an enormously rewarding work.
I would love if you could talk some about how you went about rebuilding that trust. Starting in the executive, the rest of the executive leadership, and then out throughout the rest of the organization, and then also, something that big as you're talking about with all that fraud, you also got to rebuild the trust outside the organization. So there's a lot of layers there. I'd love to hear your strategy.
Sure, great question, Cam. I was really lucky in that the board of directors were singularly focused on my charge to build a culture of integrity. And it, as you suggested in your comment, it starts at the top. So the board was 100% committed to the journey of rebuilding a culture of integrity across the entire organization. That was actually my job description. It was literally that, to build a culture of integrity across the company. The board was already on board. There had been a lot of transition on the executive team, but the new executive team and the new CEO was 100% supportive. I was his first hire, his first senior hire. he was also 100% committed. And it began with a process of identifying what our core values were. We engaged employees in that process. We got their input. We incorporated that input into what eventually was our code of conduct. We did a refresh of a pretty skeletal code of conduct. It was a paper document. It was really not lived. You got to produce the paper document, and then you got to live it. It was through training, through implementing into our processes. And part of building a culture is not just building a culture of integrity and respect and honesty and transparency, but building a culture of performance. I mean, as a complex business, we needed to perform, and we had not been performing. And so it wasn't just getting the ethics piece right, as important as that was, but getting the business pieces right. And it was a cascading process. It was being consistent. I knew that the first test of the commitment would be when a very high performing, high producing executive did something wrong. That's the litmus test. And I said, well, I could either have a really short run here, or this could be a really key turning point. And this person was extremely well known, extremely high financial performer, and not always making the best decisions. And there was a situation where I had to step in, and I said to the board chair and the CEO, I said, we're going to have to deal with this, and let me lay out some options. And they did the right thing, and that sent.
What was the right thing?
That was right. That was perhaps the most powerful education, when people saw that this person who had previously gotten away with a lot of stuff was held accountable. And I know, Otis, you talk a lot about accountability, and that's such a key dimension of building a culture of integrity in any organization. So that's, I could say a lot more, but at a high level, Cam, it was starting at the top and cascading it down to the person sweeping the floors. Had to be real for everybody.
So the guy got fired then?
He got severely disciplined, and eventually he was exited from the company. So.
He saw more opportunity somewhere else.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Well, you know, how long does something like that take? Because you hear, I've heard this process. We've had other people talk about. Yeah,
I was just going to say, I think the sports comparison, we talk about that. We've talked about that a bunch, where it's like you bring in the new head coach, and it's like, why isn't this fixed? It's been 6 weeks, it's been a month, it's like, why isn't the team winning yet? There's this confusion on the timeline there. Yeah, go ahead, Dan. I'll give it back to you. But
so let me start by quoting. I think it was Warren Buffett who said, "It takes 20 years to build a reputation, and 5 minutes to lose it."
Oh yeah.
So. I'll give you a sense of the size of the organization. It was about a $2.5 billion company in terms of revenue, and in terms of employees, about 20,000 employees. And it took us 13 years. And where we got to in that 13-year journey, a lot of spade work, a lot of just digging and staying at it. We had our employee engagement moved from the bottom 10% of the global employee engagement database that the Gallup organization keeps to the 99th percentile. We were actually recognized as one of a couple of dozen companies in the world that sort of hit that level. That took 13 years to do, to rebuild employee engagement. Our financial performance took just as long to build back. And at the end of that 13-year period, our bond rating was AAA across the board. And from a reputational standpoint, we were recognized as one of about 130 companies, all industries across the world, by an organization that evaluates sort of the ethical culture of organizations. So took a long time. 13 years is a long time. A little better than what Warren Buffett said, but not by much.
Yeah, I mean, what we used to say when I was back on the team. I mean, it was one all shit. Throws out 1,000 attaboys.
Yeah,
That's really what it is.
Yeah.
In those 13 years, which is amazing. Because the consistency, it doesn't, I think the point I keep wanting to emphasize, and I've done this with clients before, but this is such a great example. I'm going to say, go back to this episode, listen to Jeff, 13 years, dude. Because it takes time and you have to be consistent over those 13 years or 20.
Yes.
And that's the hard part.
Yes.
Because there's knockbacks, somebody's going to you're going to hit in the face with a brick every once in a while.
Yep.
What was the how I was trying to put a quantification on it, but I'm really love to see the team that started on day one said, all right, this is really screwed up. We need to fix it. To the team that was standing there after 13 years where you said, I think we got here. How much of a change was there in that team?
Well, the leadership team, 100% turnover. It didn't happen all at once. It was that there were certain individuals like any change in leadership who left either of their own volition or were encouraged to leave right away. And new people were coming in. I was the first new person. I was the turnaround guy, right hand person to the CEO. So what changed at the end of those 13 years was it was an entirely new leadership team. I mentioned that there was a new CEO. Our processes changed a lot. The way we held people accountable changed a lot. And one of the things that I think was a really key factor or differentiator is that we gave equal focus, equal emphasis on high integrity and high performance. It's not one or the other, because no margin, no mission. We were nonprofit. If there was no margin, there wasn't going to be any mission, because there wouldn't be the resources to support that and fund that. Probably a second key point, in addition to the one that I previously mentioned, we had the CEO of one of our business units in a different geography. Similar thing. There was some inappropriate stuff that didn't meet with those standards, and that person was summarily terminated, was exited from the organization immediately upon discovering what had happened. And the chief operating officer came to me and said, okay, the other CEOs are asking what happened to this guy. And I need to respond to that. I need to respond to them. I said, are you asking me to write the memo? He said, yeah. So I wrote the memo that basically said, we expect highest levels of integrity, highest levels of performance. And those who don't meet those high standards, they can't stay here. This is the deal. These are the expectations. That memo, which went out to, 10 or 12 CEOs, within probably 24 hours, that spread across the organization, because it was a clear statement by the chief operating officer. To his credit, it was his memo. I wrote it, but it was his memo, and it sent a clear message. He was behind it. He just needed help kind of articulating it. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the most powerful education isn't the stuff in an online course or in a lecture course, but it's when people see something that happened and said, wow, I get get the lesson. The lesson's clear here.
I'd be curious to talk more, to hear your perspective on rather the that tie of the integrity, the belief, the trust, the culture to that actual performance. Not just holding the standard for both, but how having that better culture actually contributes to the performance. Because I think a lot of folks, you can have an amazing culture and never get a sale. There is a reality there at the same time. So I'd love to hear what that positive impact was for you.
Yeah, I always wanted to make a linkage between what we do and how we do it. Mm-hmm. So there are lots of ways to make a sale or whatever your particular business might be. A sale is a sale, but there are different ways of getting there, right? Some of them are high integrity. Some of them are maybe not so much, and we emphasized a lot both the what and the how and the why. Here's why we do what we do. Here's how we do it, and here's the thing that we do. And connecting those three things, and because it was a very mission-based organization, the why component was really clear. It was very the system was known prior to this fraud, which was one individual acting alone. They had enjoyed just an extraordinary reputation, and one guy brought it down. That person there was not trust and verify. That person was not watched. That person was not, his work wasn't verified. It wasn't trust and verify. You got to trust and you got to verify. There were a lot of trust, but there was no verify. So it was incredible what the devastation of one individual's actions, one executive's actions, and then it took a long time to build back what they had before the fraud. So,
how did you measure progress? Because it's such an intangible thing. We've talked about this with Tribe and Purpose and leadership development and all these sort of skills and things like that. It's very difficult without just making up some BS.
Daily scorecards.
Yeah, no, it is very, very difficult. And unlike financial performance, which is very quantitative, very measurable, very clear, measuring progress in from a cultural standpoint is very, very difficult. Here's one thing that I wasn't the only thing that I looked at, but one thing that I looked at. Prior to we had a like most highly regulated companies these days, we had a hotline or a helpline where if people had concerns about a leader or about a business practice or something or other, they could call an anonymous line, report a concern, ask a question, and then there would be follow-up on that. Probably the most disturbing indicator to the board of directors immediately in the aftermath of this fraud being committed, or immediately after the fraud was discovered. It had been perpetrated over a multi-year period. But they looked at those, the calls to the hotline or the helpline, and there were 0 calls. You might look at that and say, oh, no calls. That's good. Everything is great. Nobody's complaining about anything. I take a very different perspective, which is I want people to feel like their voice matters, that the concerns they raise will be taken seriously. And so we measured, even if the calls could not be substantiated, or even if the calls related to something very minor, not really material to the business operation or the culture, but the degree to which people felt comfortable raising their hand and saying, "Hey, this doesn't quite seem right to me," and I was very proud that by the end of that 13 years, the reporting rate was above industry standards, which meant that our employees, did that mean there was more stuff going on? You can never tell to investigate each individual case.
Yeah.
But that was a certain form of, it's not perfectly valid, but a very important indicator that employees felt comfortable raising their hand, bringing issues forward, confident that it would be taken seriously and that follow-up action. And then we also measured, we had a way that we could preserve anonymity and still circle back to people who brought issues forward and ask them, how did you feel about the process? Not did you agree with what the outcome was, but was there transparency? Was there openness? Was there follow-up? Were you kept apprised to the degree that that's appropriate in HR? There are sort of some parameters you got to watch from an HR standpoint. But we would say, look, I can't tell you what we did, but I can tell you that appropriate action's been taken. Disciplinary action has been taken. We're not going to tell you, what we did. Hung the person up, by their toenails, what have you. But they're soft indicators, but they're meaningful indicators. Softer. Some people might call them soft. They're hard to measure, hard to get. Yeah.
Yeah, no kidding. I'm curious, talking about all these different lessons that you learned over the course of that 13 years and reflecting on it. I'm curious, kind of put on your coaching hat more so in the application. What is your favorite lesson? For the average good business that is not wanting to go down that path, let's say, what is the key lesson you think for them?
Thank you, Kim. And I learned so much, from that experience, leading, a very difficult transformation, turnaround over a long period of time. It took a lot of resilience, a lot of patience, a lot of stick-to-itiveness. And I think those learnings have served me really well. There are very few things in that 13-year period, and then the time before that and after it, because I had a career that spanned, a 30-year period. That was a very significant 13-year period. But there's very few things I haven't seen. I've seen some crazy stuff. I've seen some disturbing stuff. I've seen some inspiring stuff. Some exemplary stuff in the organizations, the employees, and most especially the leaders I've had the privilege of working with. I was the chief ethics officer for this large health system, and I had a bunch of ethics officers who I was responsible for. And I would remind them, your job is a lonely job a lot of the times. A lot of times you're not popular. A lot of times people aren't ecstatic to see you when you show up, but you've got a job to do, and you need to do it respectfully. You need to do it with humility. You need to do it with discretion. And there was a lot of coaching that I did at that time, not only coaching the people that reported to me, but frankly coaching the CEO and the board chair, how to handle things when they asked. I didn't insert myself unless either I was asked or I felt like the door was open and I was invited to come in. And perhaps the most important skill, Cam, is listening. You can't make assumptions. You can't create stories. You really got to listen to what people are telling you, and not only to the words, but to the other stuff, the feelings, the attitude, the assumptions, the intentions. And that's really a key part of coaching, right? Is really listening to those whom we serve, in my case, CEOs and small business owners, and understanding what their struggles are, what might be the beliefs that they have going on in their own heads that are self-limiting. Some of those beliefs are empowering, but some of them are self-limiting. Based on what they said, where are their blind spots? Based on what they say, where are their superpowers? Where are their unique gifts? Where do they need help? Where do they not need help, and where do they need help? So all of those things require an understanding of what's really happening, which is listening, right? I say to my members routinely, in our peer group meetings, our meetings are 12 to 16 CEOs from non-competing companies. And the diversity of the companies is as wide as you could possibly imagine. And I said, look, I am not the expert in the room. I'm not the guy with all the answers. I hope I'm the guy to ask the question that you've never thought of. I hope to be the guy who asks a question that forces you to think, forces you to reflect, forces you to question. And by doing that, I hope the questions I ask will lead you to the answers that you need. I'm concerned not so much about answering people's questions as questioning their answers and challenging them. And some people don't like that. Some people want me to give them the answer, and I have to sit tight, push back, or just be quiet and say, I'm not going to give you the answer. I don't know what the answer is. You need to journey there. You need to walk that path. And so I think the experience that I went through with this major turnaround, very high stakes, our reputation in the market, our reputation nationally depended on it. And you got to be a really good listener to navigate this kind of change. You got to lead for sure. And listening is a form of leadership.
Would you mind sharing with us, some of the how? Because, we're kind of talking up here in the, the fix, but it really comes down to, in your role as a leader, as the ethics guy in that organization, and you talk about coaching and managing and developing people. Share with us some of the how, because I think that's such an important piece for folks to hear and understand.
Great question. And I'm going to tie it into my coaching because there are a lot of parallels. In both the work that I did as the ethics officer and as a coach, I do coaching. I lead peer groups, and I do private executive coaching with each of my members. So I interact with my members twice every month in a group setting and in an individual setting. In my in the turnaround role that I've been talking about, there's a similar kind of dynamic that I was part of a leadership team, and I interacted with many different teams in my role as I was kind of an internal consultant. That it doesn't quite capture it all, but I think it's that sort of thing where I'm listening to what's happening in a meeting and watching behaviors, and hey, I noticed somebody seems very upset about something, or they're very excited, or they're very energized, or they're very passive, or they're sitting back, they're inserting themselves, or they're not inserting themselves, and I'll get curious about that, and I might talk to them privately and say, hey, I noticed that you didn't have much to say. What's up? Or you had a lot to say. What's up? And on the ethics side, here's a really key commonality, and that you guys will relate to. As a coach, I view my role as helping leaders find the best version of themselves, right? That's what we all want to do as coaches. I say to my members, I want to help you become the best you can be. And at an organizational level, that's precisely what I was doing. I was a catalyst, a facilitator, a leader for this organization's sincere desire to be the best version of itself. And that happens in a totality as a group, lots of employees, but it also happens one-on-one, one person at a time. And same with coaching, right? I mean, in a peer group, my role is to assure that there's a safe space in the room where all voices are welcomed, where respect governs, where people have the courage to challenge each other and to be challenged. They have a commitment to the other members' growth and development. They have a passion to grow themselves. Those are all principles that applied to the turnaround work that I did. In my groups, I try to create a safe space. And in that safe space, the courage to confront and challenge. We call it carefrontation, to create a caring environment. And then in the context of that environment, not be afraid to challenge people. In some cases, to confront them as necessary. That's the same in the turnaround work, and that gets very dicey when the people are very, very senior, and doing it with respect, but also directness and clarity of purpose, and staying out of checking our egos at the door. That's a key part of being a coach, being a leader. That happens in our group meetings. That's one of our norms. You check your ego at the door. And I need to check my ego too, not just the members. I do. And in every session, I got to check my ego, individual session. What can I learn from you in this moment? I hope you learned something from it, but what can I learn?
Hmm.
I'm really curious. I want to shift gears a bit, and really, it's in the same vein of things. Talking about turning around an organization, talking about building trust, all that kind of thing. Whenever we talk with folks in the nonprofit space, I always think of the nonprofit toxicity that can happen. I know I've got a lot of friends that have worked at nonprofits where it is this. You got to work over your 40 hours because we're feeding the hungry kids. Jeff, don't you want to feed the kids? And there's this really intense pressure kind of built on the person's belief in the cause. And it's a really nasty thing. And in my experience talking with those folks and seeing those organizations, it's a hard thing to root out because it is, moral in that way, because you're trying to feed the hungry kids and all of that. I would love to hear your perspective on that, Jeff, and maybe even how to start to flip that culture around.
Another great question. One of the things in the healthcare space, lots of research coming out on burnout among caregivers, doctors and nurses, and we saw that in a big way during COVID, where it was just an unbelievable siege on just enormous burdens on the healthcare delivery system, and thankfully, some thought leaders in the healthcare space, and I think of, for example, the Mayo Clinic, one of the most respected healthcare delivery organizations in the country, if not the world. They said, "Hey, we got to get on top of this. We got to figure out what we can do to address burnout so that people stay well, so they stay healthy." And I think particularly when it comes to the poor, the hungry, those on the margins, those who are disenfranchised, I mean, sometimes it seems like a bottomless pit. And the work never ends. I think of something that was said at my father's retirement. If he were still alive, he'd be 102. But he was an accountant. He was a very detail oriented guy, and he was a stickler for details, and for every detail counted. And the CEO at my dad's retirement party told the story of the guy on the beach where there are oyster shells on the dry part, and if they're left out in the sun at the tide, they'll die. And the guy comes and he throws the oyster or the clam, throws it in the water, throws it where it won't dry out. And somebody watches him doing it and said, what difference are you making? This beach is full. What impact can you make? He picks up an oyster, he throws it. He said, well, made a difference to that one. Picks up one, makes a difference to that, makes a difference to that one. And I think that underscores the importance of every interaction matters, and it matters to the person you're interacting with. And so, to the extent, in the case of the nonprofit sector, where people, for every person they help, there's 10 more that they can't get to. Just finding ways to support folks, that you're making a difference to the people that you're making a difference to. So that's probably not a satisfactory answer, but I acknowledge the challenge and the difficulty of what you described, Cam.
Did you ever have to, like, I think the best way to put it is like, hey, Bob, go home, go, because if you continue to do this in a week, a month, or whatever, you won't be able to do what you're,
Sure.
Driving and fulfilling your passion to help people.
Sure.
Did you ever have that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's incumbent on leaders, no matter what sector you're in, right? It's not, there's no ownership in just the nonprofit space, but in many organizations of all kinds, in all kinds of industries. What's the leader's job, right? To take care of the tribe, and that's where the listening and observation really matters. I think that one key role of a leader, particularly in a situation where you're trying to change an organization or help an organization reach its full potential, is sometimes you have to stress the system a little bit, set expectations that cause people to stretch, but you've got to regulate the distress. Like you want to challenge people, you want to push them, but you got to know when to tap on the brakes and when to press the gas. And I think that's a really key leadership competency, no matter what sector or industry or company you happen to be in, is pushing people so that the organization realizes its full potential, but not pushing so hard that the people break or systems break or, God forbid, the organization breaks.
I was kind of joking about doing the daily scorecards as a way of measuring, but self-reported data, of course, isn't great. But at the end of the day, if it's the thing you can get, that's worth it. But then also the thing is, talking about people who are bought in, they're going to give you, a relatively accurate score on things like that. What's coming to mind for me, and the reason I'm bringing that up is, with U of A rugby, the boys will do soreness scores or soreness ratings, basically. Yeah. And so then we know as coaches, it's like, hey, are we going to hit today or not? If they're all on 10s, and actually I don't even know the system because Coach Duffy does that, perks of being an assistant coach. But no, it's if they're all maxed out, then it's like, all right, we're not going to hit today. We'll give them a little bit of a break. We're not going to run them too hard, those kind of things there. What do you think of any sort of replication of that? Did you have anything like that? Like thinking less from the big picture systems, again, zooming down that one more layer into what's the mechanism right there? Yeah.
So what your comment brings up for me, I was an athlete. I was a wrestler back in the day, and lots of injuries there. We didn't have we back in my day, we didn't get a report out on a daily basis, but it was incumbent on
run.
Yeah, if you were a starter, you were incumbent. It was incumbent on you to make sure you were either good enough to go when Friday night came, or that you let the coach know so he could find somebody to fill in. Mm-hmm. This is what comes up for me is a practice that I observed that I found to be a helpful one. Is a simple check-in with employees, where I'd ask 4 questions. What did you love last week about your work? What did you hate about last week? What are your priorities for this week? And how can I help? It told me 4 very important things. What did you love about last week? Tells me where their sweet spot is, what they love to do, probably what they're good at doing if they loved it. And also triggers a little bit of the gratitude brain cells perhaps in their mind. The what did you hate last week gives me a clue for some watch outs for me as their leader. Either maybe they don't have the resources they need, they don't have the capabilities, or it's just a stressful circumstance they're dealing with. And those are things that I'm going to tuck away to circle back on, to follow up, because if someone's hating the same thing a lot week after week after week after week, there's only going to be a matter of time until they're hitting the door and looking for employment elsewhere. What are your priorities this week tells me what are they focused on right now. It gives me a chance to evaluate, are those the priorities I'd want them to be focused on? And gives me a chance to say, hey, that's great, but have you thought about this? Or gives me a chance to respond with it. And then how can I help conveys that I'm here to support them, that my success, the organization's success, is really a function of their success. I hadn't thought of it as a daily scorecard. I did this practice on a weekly basis, touching base with each of my key direct reports once each week. So it's a weekly kind of scorecard that we're not writing it down, but I'm tucking all those things away in my own head so that I can make sure that person is both performing but also not burning out, and has the resources and skills they need.
Yeah, that's a great system. I love the simplicity of it, and I think I've had some experience with doing various forms of that. But that's a great reminder as a litmus test for your team, which, when I start thinking about those sort of things and what other great things, that we talked about. I love the fact in the turnaround that it was truly a trickle down. It was the leadership established the core values, took input, which is awesome. Input from everybody up, but the leadership established that core value and trickled it down.
Sure.
Camden, how about you? What'd you learn?
Yeah, for me, it's the idea of you have to commit to the process without knowing a deadline. That kind of like a more Fatih idea of, look, I know what my path is and we'll see how things work out. Because, we were talking about there's teams, we joked about the head coach who gets fired because they don't turn around the team fast enough and those kind of things there. You're talking a 13-year process, talking about Warren Buffett, 20 years, all those kind of things. It might take forever. It might happen quickly. You have no way of really knowing. The only thing you can do is commit to that process along the way.
Yeah.
Trust the process. How about you, Jeff? What'd you learn?
So I learned the focus on tribe is really about people and peer groups. And Vistage, I'm a coach in Vistage, a chair in Vistage, really gives emphasis on tribe. We call it a peer group, but it's a group of peers, non-competing, that got each other's back and is going to call people out when they're not keeping their promises to themselves, not keeping their commitments. And the way that your questions are from that orientation, and with weaving in the individual coaching element, which came through in your questions, I learned about the power of tribe, interacting with the tribe in its totality, and then the individual members of that tribe.
Awesome. Jeff, how do folks find you, learn more about what you're doing, and maybe help fill up that Vistage member team that you've got working?
The simplest, thank you. The simplest thing is on LinkedIn, Jeff Oak, Jeff, and Oak just like a tree. Pretty simple. That would be the simplest way for folks to reach me.
Awesome. Jeff, a lot of fun and great insights to a turnaround and what lessons you can apply going forward from that. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Otis. I really appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate your questions, which made me think, which triggers learning. So really appreciate the opportunity to be on your show.
Awesome. Cam, run us out.
All right. Thank you all for listening to today's episode of 10X Your Team with Cam and Otis. And a special thanks to our guest, Jeff Oak, for joining us today. Remember, you can watch full episodes of the show on YouTube at 10X Your Team. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to pass along to other lifelong learners in your tribe so you can enjoy them too. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. As always, the full archive of episodes available at www.10xyourteam.net. Thanks again. We'll see you all next time.